evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're a little bit past the appointed hour for the meeting, so we're going to kick it off. My name is John Ellsworth. I'm current chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in town. This meeting has been called to provide an information delivery session by the MBTA for their plans for an extension to the line from Framingham out to Worcester. A number of sites or possible sites within the town of Ashland to be utilized as stops. We're going to conduct this information meeting as in the following fashion. Before I say anything, I want to point out this is an information meeting. It's not a public hearing. A public hearing is a legal session wherein the Board of Selectmen takes inputs and deliberates, and then all input closes at the end of that kind of a session, and we can't take any more input after that. This is the beginning of a dialogue with the MBTA. They are coming out to talk to us, and my suspicions are that there could be another one or other kinds of sessions, perhaps not as formal as this, but other sessions like this before we get to the end. We're going to conduct the meeting this evening in the following fashion. There'll be a statement of somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
Okay, and that will be by the MBTA. I'll then allow the Board of Selectmen to ask questions of the team. After that, we'll throw it open to the floor for questions. Now, I'm going to try and moderate the questions. I think there's going to be a lot of questions coming up on the floor, and I would ask everybody to be patient and to allow one person after another to ask their questions in turn. Some people may have more than one question, but there are other people who would like to have an opportunity to ask a question as well. So I'm going to try and moderate going through the room, getting everybody's questions out on the table, and at the end, those folks who can't make it in sequence, just queue them all up, and we'll sort of hold that until the end. I'm also given to understand that there are a couple of statements that some members of the group that have been formed to follow this citing process would like to make. Rob Shurin wants to say something, and you also, I believe, want to say something. And is John Renane here? There's a possibility that John Renane may want to make a statement. Okay. You'll certainly be granted that opportunity, John. And that's the way we'll proceed. I think without further ado, I never did ask who was going to be the first person speaking.
I think I'll let Bob.
Okay, good. Excuse me, Bob, before you go, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I'm Charlie Stewart, Assistant Director of Construction at the MBTA.
Can't hear you.
Charlie Stewart, Charlie Stewart, Assistant Director of Construction at the MBTA.
And I'm Bob Joseph. I'm with the consulting firm of Edwards and Kelsey. I thought what we would do tonight, rather than a statement, we'll describe what it is the MBTA proposes, what the project is, and then we'll describe in a few minutes what the process is, to bring everybody up to date on where we are, and then turn it back to John for a question and answer period. First of all, the proposed project is to extend commuter rail from Framingham 23 miles to downtown Worcester. Right now, commuter rail service runs from Framingham in with 10 station stops at South Station. In the years ago, or in the mid-70s, there was service from Worcester, and in about 1975 it was abandoned from Worcester to Framingham, and just the Framingham service was retained. In the past several years, there's been substantial growth in commuter rail ridership. There's many new locomotives and many new cars. You've probably seen some of these new double-deck cars the MBTA has. And ridership has expanded tremendously, and it's now one of the fastest growing MBTA services, and it's much in demand on the other lines that the MBTA runs. Some 76,000 people a day take commuter rail from various outlying cities and towns into downtown Boston, into either the north side or North Station or South Station. The service that this line would provide service to basically Back Bay and South Station. Now then, in 1990 or in 1988, a feasibility study was undertaken by the MBTA. This is a copy of the finished document. And the feasibility study examined or answered the question, did it make any sense to extend this along this rail line? And after 2 years of study, they concluded that yes, it was feasible, and there seemed to be tremendous support for the project, especially from the Worcester end. During the course of the study, some intermediate station sites were proposed. They're not cast in concrete, it's not definite. They were more proposed for the idea of figuring out what ridership the line might get. And in this feasibility study, there were 3 intermediate stations. One was proposed in Ashland at House Street. Another was proposed in Westboro, right close to 195 and the Turnpike. And the 3rd intermediate station was proposed in Grafton. Our work, with the successful completion of this study, our firm received a contract to go the next step. And that next step is called schematic design. There's a step after schematic design, and that's called final design. And these are very discrete steps that require to advance a project from initial thinking through to construction. So we're in the initial, very early stages called schematic design, and our job during the next several months is to firm up the location of the intermediate stations, and also to do the engineering studies to figure out how we can operate passenger service, commuter rail passenger service on this existing Conrail freight line. This is a little bit different situation than some of the other commuter rail lines that the MBTA runs. Other lines there is no freight service, so there's no conflict between freight trains and the MBTA trains. This line is an active freight line, as I'm sure most of you know since they come right through your town now at a grade crossing. And it'll take a good bit of signal work and coordination with Conrail to figure out how we can make sure that the trains, Amtrak trains, Conrail trains, and the MBTA trains can all operate on this on the same tracks. We expect that in some cases we'd be double tracking, adding some track that used to be there but been removed over the years. Now, that's, again, you might ask, well, what would the commuter rail service consist of? For those of you who know it, at other areas, other lines, basically the commuter rail service is a train every half hour in the morning peak period, or roughly from 6 to 8. So you could expect a train coming through here in the morning rush hour, heading toward Boston, once every half an hour. In the what we call the off-peak period, after 8:30 or so, 8:30, the trains only go through once every 2 hours. In the afternoon, from 4 to 6, trains again would be coming out from Boston about on the half hour. And then service, I believe, stops at some sort of reasonable hour.
What? Yeah, they have a late train at 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and that's the end of it. Then there are not trains all night long. And then the first train would be somewhere around, say, 6 o'clock. Something in that order. So that's what the service consists of. Essentially, it's peak, what we call one-way peak direction. In the morning, there's more trains going into Boston. In the afternoon, there's more trains coming out. Now, the feasibility study concluded that about 2,500 people a day would take this extension. This 23-mile extension would attract an additional 2,300 people going into Boston, and about the same number would come out. So This line would be used by, you can either say 2,500 people or 5,000, depending on whether you want to look at people or trips. What I think I'd like to spend a few minutes now is explain what we've done to firm up the location, or begin our analysis of the location for these intermediate stations. And I guess I'd like to say right at the outset, no final decisions have been made on any of the intermediate station locations. We're here tonight to discuss the range of potential options that we see, and the most important part of the reason we're here is to get your ideas and see what you like or don't like. Before I discuss the potential sites in Ashland, I'd like to discuss some of the other ones, because as you probably could imagine, the intermediate stations have to work together, and again, the feasibility study talked about 2,500 people. The stations can be in different locations, but obviously they couldn't be all in a row in one town. We'd like to have some sort of reasonable spacing. These dots that we show here represent the dots that the intermediate station locations as proposed in the feasibility study. Now, since the feasibility study, we've looked at the line, the opportunities, the constraints that are out there, and I'd like to bring you up to date on what our thinking is. I'm going to start in the middle in Westboro first. We found that the station site that was proposed in Westboro, and it's called the Fruit Street site, we found that that would be exceedingly difficult to develop that site for several reasons. The wetlands and the fact that it's in what's called an area of critical environmental concern, the lack of access, and the fact that there's a huge Conrail new car distribution facility that would interfere with any kind of passenger station in that area. So the site that was proposed here, we've taken that away. And in the past few months, we've met a couple of times in Westboro. And for the time being, the folks in Westboro, or at least the committee that the selectmen of Westboro formed to look at it, have endorsed a station site located on what's called the Otis Street area, right there. And I'd like to quickly give you a couple of the pros and cons that they saw on that, as well as what we liked about it. You can get to this station site on a fairly substantial road. It's not in the residential area and is very close to Route 9. A station site here would serve Westboro as well as Shrewsbury, some of Northborough, and some other towns. But basically, it doesn't have any neighborhood impact type of issues. It avoids wetlands. There's an available site. There's 6 or 7, 8 acres of land for sale, no buildings on it, and it looks like a pretty good site. And essentially, the folks, the committee in Westboro that was formed, essentially came to the same conclusions that we did. I might as well do this end of the line before we head east to Ashland. In Grafton, there was a particular site called the Pine Street site. It had some good points and some bad points. We felt the bad points outweighed the good points. And Tufts University essentially came to the rescue and said, well, we have a piece of land to build a reserve for you, not too far away. It's essentially in the same location. But essentially, Tufts University said to us, if you put it here, it would dramatically improve access to our new $1.5 million biotech research park that they're planning. And the idea of the idea of joint development or improving an area that you're going into is obviously one of the reasons of this. It's obviously one of the main motivating factors of connecting downtown Worcester with the rest of Boston to essentially help Worcester as well as connect Worcester with the rest of the state. So anyway, we have met with the selectmen and with townsfolk in Grafton, and there seems to be actually tremendous support for a station anywhere in Grafton, and within Grafton, we like this site. So at the time being, we feel pretty good about Grafton and Westboro.
Can I ask you a question about Westboro? Can Roosevelt Park take business out there? Would they have access to the post station?
Yes.
Excuse me, I'd like to hold all the questions until after the presentation is
All right.
complete, please.
I'll answer that anyway, because actually I should have mentioned that. The Otis Street site is right next to Astra Pharmaceutical, which is a huge company that does bioresearch type of stuff. They're expanding, and they've talked to us about essentially building what would be a campus type of environment. And we see that as a good opportunity. And again, it's on a roadway without, a subdivision, residential type of abutters. All right, now let's look east in Ashland. As I said before, the House Street site was mentioned as long ago as 1984. We have in our records correspondence that showed that selectmen in the past have walked the site, a number of sites. It was, I think, Mr. Galani, who's no longer alive, but and other folks, I think your DPW director and others from the town have walked these sites. And it has been always an impression that the House Street was a favorite. However, because of a few weeks ago, the selectmen asked us to open this up again, we've essentially revisited the entire town and looked at what we think are a possible range of sites here. And there's 3 in Ashland. I'm going to show you one in South Road as well. First, we might as well start with the center of Ashland, the so-called Front Street location. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. The good points, the bad points, it's obviously in the center of town. It's the site of the historical train station. There is some parking there. The bad points, I guess, there's not enough room for the parking that we would like to see. We'd like to see a station site in the 400 to 500 parking spaces in that range. A site in downtown, I think we're talking 200 or 250 spaces. Okay, now another site that we looked at that has promised before are 500 cars off Pleasant Street. It's some vacant land and some developed land. It's next to, I'm probably not going to get this right, but some sort of a church, the Latter Rain or something.
Church of the Lord.
All right, so you know that area. There's some vacant land there. There are some existing buildings. But it seems to be on a straight street where there wouldn't be what we call sight distance problems of cars moving in and out. And it's available land. There isn't a dot on the so-called Cherry Street, McGunkle. Some of you might be familiar with that. There was a site mentioned in the feasibility study on the McGunkle Cherry Street area. From looking at those, we believe the access is less desirable to those sites, that site or sites, if you will. The access isn't as direct. It's through residential areas. There's probably a continuation of the Superfund site, and there isn't the size availability. So we don't really consider that a viable site at this time. But the downtown is viable, especially for a smaller site. The Pleasant Street site is viable. And the third site in Ashland is the House Street site. The House Street site, I think it's probably its best point is that it's a relatively large site. The feasibility study talked about 700 cars. The way the new road has been put over there, that site is really now effectively much smaller. We don't think we could get any more than about 600 car parking in that facility. There's a substantial building there to take. That's obviously on the minus side. But it's, it's a substantial chunk, 8 or 9 acres of land, and it's always been identified as a slightly better, at least by and Reckitt's is a slightly better site than other sites in town. A fourth site on this end that is a possibility is the site here at Route 85 on Southville Road in Southborough, you know, not too far from the Ashland town line. This is a decent site as well as the others in that it would tend to serve the Southborough riders pretty well. In fact, a good percentage of riders to either probably House Street or Pleasant Street would be from Southborough, possibly Marlborough. And this end, typically when you're dealing with commuter rail, well, you may not know this here because you don't have commuter rail, so you don't take it, but the fare structure is such that you have zones, and this is what's called a Zone 5, and each succeeding station would be like another zone, a Zone 6. The Zone 5, let's say, is $68 a month, a monthly ticket. Each zone is another $8 approximately. So if this is a Zone 5 and this is a Zone 6 and this is a Zone 7, well, this might be 2 zones, this is such a distance. It's going to be $8 more a month to take this one than this one. So folks in Ashland actually might still, even though there's a station somewhere here in Ashland, they might still end up wanting to go $8 cheaper and go into Framingham instead of the, you know, congestion and, you know, that's just human nature and everybody has to call that themselves. But that's typically what we see, that a station, for instance, here, typically people are going to come from points further west. They're not going to drive west to eventually head east. So you have that factor at play here. So I think that's about it. I guess I'm just about ready now to turn it over to you, John. We have these essentially 4 sites on the eastern end of the line. We'd prefer a site in the 400 or 500 car range if possible. But we're essentially open for suggestions.
Okay, in the order of events, I suggest the selectmen go first. You might want to just continue standing up if you don't mind. In the letter that I sent to you right after our last meeting, I suggested that one of the things we were going to want to know was traffic patterns, expected number of cars per train, if you had any idea, and then a general discussion of where you felt the traffic was going to come from. I think you answered the last by stating that they're coming out of Marlborough, Southborough. Is that correct? Is that where you expect them to come from? And if you do, what do you base it on?
Well, I mean, really, commuter rail is a type of facility that actually attracts people. So even if it were here today, the people that are likely to take it 10 years from now might be folks who move here to live where, because commuting to work is how you commute is a major factor in where people settle and locate. So really, I don't think anybody, I think, this is I'm talking now from a personal point of view, I think an intuitive sense of where population centers are and where people live that want to work in downtown Boston is the way to look at this. Obviously, if you have a tiny little town like Upton, and I don't really know Upton that well, since it's very small, it doesn't have very many residents, and probably not that many residents that work in the South Station area, the down. South Station, by the way, if you folks who don't know it, is really served very well in an emerging financial district of downtown Boston. So it's all the newest, tallest buildings are within easy walk from South Station. There's just hordes of people that stream out of South Station to places like an International Place and all the new tall office buildings that are being built in downtown Boston.
So you,
I mean, my sense is for Ashland that basically, we know there's a lot of people right now today that live in Southborough that work in downtown Boston. I would suspect Hopkinton, Southborough, Ashland itself, to some degree Holliston. I mean, I think sort of intuitive, and I don't think it makes too much difference where that station is. You're generally going to draw from about the same towns.
I was going to add that whenever we do a license plate survey at any of our rail stations, that's basically the pattern we get is basically the the bulk of them are from the town that the station's in, or the adjacent town if it's a little bit to the western end. And then it drops off. It's the immediate towns, the towns that touch the station that you have a station in. That's where the bulk of people come.
One of the big changes between the presentation we got in December and what we heard 2 weeks ago was the elimination of the stop at 495 Route 9 of the Mass Pike. Now, when the original survey was presented to Ashland, that was characterized as a magnet stop for the bulk of the cars. How many cars were planned to go to that stop? My recollection was 12 to 1,500. Excuse me, 10 to 15,000.
No, the lots, the original, from the feasibility study, this was a small stop, 250 car parking. This was a 1,000 car facility, and this was a 770 car facility. So this was a 1,000 car, and Ashland was something like 770.
The nexus of the most major roads in our area would have had potentially the smallest parking lot under that plan. The nexus, the point where the three most major roads in our area join, the Mass Pike, 495, and Route 9, would have had an extremely small parking lot. That's a large one, excuse me. It would have had the biggest. Is that correct?
I think that was the thinking. After all, you look at major roads like 495 and Pike, where they cross and where the railroad crosses, obviously you'd want to try to do a station there.
Now, where do those cars go? That's the point of all of this. Do they go west or they go east?
Well, it depends which cars you're talking about. If you're talking about cars heading east on the turnpike, we're exploring a possible station stop in this area. And what we would like to do, there's a bunch of several sites we've looked at. We haven't even gotten to the stage that you see here in Ashland. What we would like to do is be able to intercept folks that are heading east on the turnpike. And here we have, in this area here, this is exit 11. And at that point, the tracks are only 200 yards from exit 11 on the turnpike. Right now, at the turnpike parking lot, there's a sizable ride-sharing operation going on. So people need park in a turnpike lot and essentially carpool in together. And with the turnpike's new deal they're offering, I think that type of service is going to be more popular. We think there's opportunities there to provide a rail service.
Bob, could we please come back east though and talk about Westboro and
The reason I'm
the impact on that?
talking about that is if we're going to intercept people on the turnpike, we think this is the better spot to do it than here. So you can. So what I'm saying is take one of your roads out of your equation.
What about 495 and Route 9?
Well, we think that Route 85 is probably going to be a more likely road. Again, assuming that we're drawing from just the few surrounding towns, we don't think there's going to be a lot coming on 495.
What do you base that on?
Can we get to that later? Okay, Terry, do you have a question?
I know that you talked about different sizes of the lots depending on the size of the site, but do you have a minimal number of parking spaces on which a station is viable? Is there a break-even point on parking spaces?
Well, for this line, I mean, within the T system, there are some commuter rail stations with as few as 20 parking spaces. The further we get, but those serve communities, I can think of Needham, for instance, where a huge percentage of the people who take the train essentially walk from fairly dense neighborhoods. We're not serving that type of car. We expect nearly all of the people who will ride the train to drive to the station. It's essentially it's an intermodal facility. You drive to park your car, get out of your car, get on a train. That's the service that we're providing. So we feel we have to match the expected ridership with parking spaces. Now the issue on the size, again, I know you want me to talk about Ashland, but I have to talk about the others. The Grafton station does not have a large population center to draw from, and this will be in the smaller range, 200, 250 car parking facility. The Otis Street facility, let me put this dot back, it is in the range of 600, could be in the range of 6, I'm not going to say is. Please, if I act like any of this is already done, you'll have to forgive me because it's all in the only in the early planning stages. But this one could be in the 600 car range. I've already mentioned that House Street could be in that same range. The reason why we'd like the Ashland station to be at least in the 400 range is because we would like to get a total of about 23 or 2,400 car parking for the whole line. And this is essentially the one little one. We can't afford to have another little station. We would like to have no more than 4 intermediate stations. And the reason for that is that each station adds about 2.5 minutes to the total trip time. And right now, what we're looking at, trip time from downtown Worcester to South Station would be 1 hour and 9 minutes. And you know, we would like to make it quicker. You can drive it quicker with no traffic. Of course, you can't do that with traffic. But the trade-off is if you keep adding stations, you're adding total trip time, and that's what we're up against here.
The reason behind my question was because the traffic will come to fit the size of the parking lot that there is for it.
Yes.
And I have a great deal of concern. And I say it as somebody who takes commuter rail to work every day. I have a great deal of concern with a whole lot of cars, with a 600 car parking lot and 1,200 car trips minimal generated. 1,200 car trips just for the people who are parking there, not counting people who are being dropped off and anything else. And I find that for most any of the sites in Ashland something very difficult to imagine handling without making a dramatic change to the nature of the town. Just with those sorts of peak traffic stuff in the early morning.
In evaluating any proposal, obviously you try and find the positives and the negatives. I think the positives are fairly obvious. You get increased local public access to Boston, and the town ends up being in a better position to market itself to business and to residents as having easier public access to a major city. And looking at the negatives, you have to see what happens to the town as a whole, and more specifically, you have to look at what happens to the neighborhood which surrounds the location. And I guess my questions are more in line with that last concern. I think that when you have local road system which was designed for residential traffic only, there's a lot of question in my mind what happens with all these car trips that are generated. What happens to a road system that has not been built to take that kind of traffic? And who pays to upgrade those roads so that it does? And specifically, I'm talking about Corderville, Pleasant Street, and certainly House Street, which right over that bridge now is down to something like 18 feet. Where does the money come from to upgrade a local road system to support that station? Is this now a town expense, a state expense, and an MBTA expense?
I'm going to answer your question, but I have to give a little background. Once we get the general stations sites picked, We then enter into a more detailed analysis stage, and essentially we have to do a very detailed environmental analysis, and a big part of that is traffic analysis. We have to make sure that every road that cars are likely to use to get to that station can handle the traffic. And there's very specific quantitative measures of how that's done. They're called levels of service. I think these are generally known now from developers that have come in. You've probably heard about level of service A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'm seeing some nods, so I'm going to continue with that. But if a road or an intersection is now at a level of service D, and the additional cars that are going to use that intersection to access the station are going to force it into a level of service F, the project has to take on the job of improving that intersection. And I think because most people know Route 9, I know it's not in your town, I'm going to use Westboro again as an example. The intersection of Route 9 and Boda Street, where the new Sam's is it Sam's or whatever, Sam's Outlet? I believe that intersection is now a D. Sam's had to invest some money and put some money into a fund to improve it as conditions worsen. We know that our project will also have to put money in to further upgrade the signals and to provide sidewalks and to do a whole host of things so that when all said and done, the intersection still functions in a reasonable level of service. Now, here, I think we could all agree, if we had a station here and traffic's going to go like that, I think we would agree on, what needs to be fixed. I think when you get into a town like Ashland, and let's say we're talking about Pleasant Street, and let's say that's 400 cars, there's a lot more intersections that could be, an additional 50 cars through some of these intersections might force one from, let's say, a D to an E, or from an E to an F, or whatever. That's just from the times that I've been through the town. I can see that it's not as clear-cut traffic going through this town, and we might have to study many intersections back to see what the impacts would be. Where there's a clear connection, upgrading a particular intersection or something like Oak Street, let's say some obvious ones, Oak Street, Porterville Road, that's one that probably the project would be responsible for upgrading.
Okay. You're talking about intersections.
The example you used, I think, House Street over here, all through here, my sense that isn't one. Because I think our analysis would show that most folks get into it from this end and not up through here.
Well, you lead me into my next question. You've done a preliminary feasibility study. Does that feasibility study deal at all the traffic patterns and specifically, again, House Street? You have a road there that gets relatively few trips per day. Actually, the last 2 years it's been no trips per day. Once the bridge opens, it'll still be relatively few trips per day to service just the neighborhood. Now, obviously, you are going to draw some sort of traffic from Hopkins through the back way, down 85, shortcut down House Street, and to the facility. Does your feasibility study, at least at this point, recognize that kind of activity, and what do you project?
Well, with regard to that site, we haven't begun the detailed analysis that would look at precisely those issues. But before the site was, really fully blessed as a site, it would receive that kind of very close scrutiny. But we would want to hopefully pick a site to do that close scrutiny on. We don't want to do it on 100 potential sites. We would like to pick some sites that generally folks feel pretty good about with the assumption that things can work. I mean, some of this is intuitive. I mean, obviously you have an opinion, and it's those kind of opinions that count. If you think in your mind, and I just have a feeling that you do, that there's no way it could work without widening the thing to 4 lanes, and that you don't want to tolerate that, even if it would be paid for by the state, then, don't consider the site.
Okay, I guess what I don't understand, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I always felt before you pick the site, that you did the study to make sure that it meets your criteria, rather than picking the site first and then going through and doing the study to try and make it fit. One last question, then I'll move on, because I know a lot of people have questions. In native, what is the size of that parking lot? Cars?
I don't know offhand.
Okay, so that's a relatively small stop in terms of cars for being on the system.
That was built, at the time that was built, I must say that commuter rail has really developed since then. And it was worked out with the owner of the shopping center. And that's all he wanted to sell. We should have actually, in retrospect, made a large parking lot there.
I'm just trying to put them in relationship, and I'm trying to think of the Ashland site being basically 3 to 4 times larger than the native site. That's all.
I just have 2 quick questions. You touched on Pleasant Street as a possible site, as well as Route 85 Southborough as a potential site. Can you estimate the size that could be, or the number of cars that could be accommodated in each of those 2 locations?
I'd say the 400 range.
At 400 each?
No,
No, that was it.
I noticed David has been down this year. David, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, by the way, for coming out. I appreciate it. Bob? I'm the state representative from Ashland. A couple of questions. First of all, I'm very pleased that you're here. I'm disappointed that the T chose not to.
Speak up, the mic, can you get the mic in, Steve? And tell
The
us.
mic is going to be for TV.
Okay.
Still can't hear.
I'll speak up. I want to thank you for coming, first of all. And I wish we had done this sooner, but the fact is you're here and I appreciate it. I'm disappointed that this hearing is not being sponsored by the T. At my request, consistently said, no, this is not being sponsored by the T, this is being sponsored by the selectmen. My concern about that is that it wasn't built in as part of the process for citing these locations. And my concern is not just for Ashland, but generalized in terms of the way these decisions are being made. I would hope that you're recording the questions and the testimony, whether you're going to get a copy of the tape or whatever, but I'm very interested in hearing how the feedback tonight is going to be dealt with. I'm very concerned about the public participation process. Frankly, I think personally it's a good idea to have the extension. I'm looking forward to helping with it. I would actually be happy to see a stop in Ashland if there was some consensus around its size and location. I don't think that's, at least from my concern, it's not to try to stop the process. But I do think that it's moving very quickly. It's moving without having had the kind of input that the public wants and I think deserves. I'm not pontificating, I'm not politicking here. I'm very concerned about that particular issue, the kind of participation that is being advocated and supported. I hope that the process slows down enough to make sure that the questions that are asked tonight are answered in detail before a second level of analysis goes on relative to any site. That's my major request, to make sure that these questions that are asked tonight get detailed responses before anything else happens. My generalized concern is that this site has been not thought through in terms of the overall objective of the extension, which is to take traffic off roads that are currently crowded. If, for example, you were to look at the site in downtown Ashland, and I'm not advocating for a particular site, I'm really interested in hearing what people have to say about this. But if you took, for example, a downtown Ashland site at, say, 250 spaces, which is what you say might be available, you would take that number of cars at least off Route 126, which is an extraordinarily crowded street. And people, frankly, would pay the extra $8 a month, I can guarantee you, not to have to drive down 126 if they don't have to get to that downtown station. One of the reasons for the extension is to unclog some of the other stops. So if you had a small station there, you would in fact begin to relieve some traffic on existing roads rather than adding traffic to roads that are not already burdened. That's one important consideration. If you then put another site, say, of another 250 or 300 cars in Southborough, on the edge you would have a distance between those two sites so that you could theoretically put small stops at both sites with at least as much distance as you have between some of the other sites that you've already put in. I'm not suggesting that's the right solution. All I'm suggesting is that that's the kind of consideration that needs to be made relative to the impact on the community. Third question has to do with catchment area. You said that you think that people generally come from the town in which the site is located. My question is, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you build a site over by 495 and try to expand the use for towns that are north and south of that site in a way that maximizes the impact of the commuter rail and also keeps people from having to come east before they get onto commuter rail? Those are some sort of substantive technical questions, but most importantly, I would like to know before I sit down, if you could articulate for us, what is the public participation process that is currently planned for taking the data and input of the citizens and the selectmen and the other town officials and feeding that into the process? Who ultimately makes this decision? When will it be made? And what are the mechanisms by which folks here get a chance to have some say over how their town is going to be impacted?
I guess the process is really a series of public meetings, talking with public officials, citizens, trying to develop a consensus. We'd rather have a consensus on what we do across the board whenever we build a capital project.
And how is that consensus going to be developed?
Through meetings like this and more meetings.
So you intend specifically to take the questions raised, get answers to them, bring them back to another public hearing at which the answers will be given and people will have a chance to respond to those?
That's one method. Bob mentioned what's happened out west and what's happened for us when we're doing the old colony. Local communities have set up a citizen group or a task force to work with. It might be something you might want to consider. I'm
struck by the fact that that was not part of the original process, to set up a community task force for every community in which you were thinking about putting a site. I would very much like you to work with the selectmen to do that kind of work, but also, frankly, I think the folks that come here tonight deserve to know exactly what is being done with the questions that they're raising tonight, and to have a chance to review those.
Well, Bob, if you go back up to the larger map, and you've alluded to it, and Representative Vignani just asked a question which I think indicates that there needs to be a little more graphical clarification as to what a ridership contour is, because it's, as you know, it's more like a kidney-shaped, elongated pattern. And if you could pick like the House Street site, and if you've got a pointer or a ballpoint pencil with pen retracted, kind of outline what the projected ridership contour would be there?
I couldn't give you that because the ridership projections weren't done by a specific town. As I said, a lot of this is done to serve people who don't even live in any of these towns yet. But the type of service we're talking about, it's not something new or something that's difficult to comprehend because the T is already running this service on some 6 other lines. As I said, one of the reasons we're here tonight is because that service has met with a great deal of success. So it's not like we're not fearful that we might build a station and not have anybody show up.
No,
that's not.
my point is that to serve the citizens of Ashland, you've got to get it fairly well down the street. And David Mignani indicated that somehow there would be some relief off 26 by the siting of the station. I don't think you can get it far enough east to give any relief to 126 and our residents in that side of town. Because they'll all be going down the street with trade.
Do you know where 126 is from?
Maybe you want
Is this- is
to
this-
use the board and
is this-
point out the problem that you're talking about? 135. Might be helpful to do that. Paul, why don't you point again, point out what you're saying.
126.
126 is right here. Okay? So there's the Framingham station.
Right.
Now, a station sited here, for example, will generate commuters from as far east as maybe a third of the way to the next downstream station, and far to the north, far to the south, but extending upstream. Basically,
I think that's not unreasonable to make that assumption.
in order to serve the Ashland population in this area, which is currently using Framingham, you can't site a station far out east. I mean, even if you had to
It's the town line right now.
but Kissimmee, that's right. Well, someone living here is not going to know.
No, I don't expect they would. As I said at the outset, I would think that a good many people who now take commuter rail and who might in the future would still continue to go to Framingham.
Okay.
One question that the state rep asked about, but that's the 495 issue. Yes, conventional wisdom would dictate that you would try to locate one here, and that's what we've actually spent most of our time doing, is looking to see if we could find such a site. And the fact of the matter is, there isn't a site, and if there were a site, there would be a dot in this location. Now, to get a site here would require a huge modification to this interchange at 495 of the Turnpike that would be in the range of $15 to $20 million investment. Now, to serve a 1,000-car facility or even a larger one, that's not a reasonable type of investment to make. There's still the issue of this tremendous amount of wetlands here. There's not a piece of high and dry land. And a commuter rail station cannot coexist here with the type of freight operations that are going on at this huge new car distribution center that Conrail owns. So yes, I will agree with you that if we didn't have those problems, this would be a nice location, and who knows, it might be a regional station. But I would like to mention that in all the other stations, I think there are some, I don't recall the number of stations we have, but on all the other lines, we don't really have any major regional stations. Even the ones like the 128, from license plate surveys that have been done, serve just the immediate neighboring communities. And typically we have people drive 5 or 6 miles at most to park and take the ride in. We don't have people driving 20 miles or more. If they were going to do that much driving, they'd just keep going to Boston. So the type of rider we want wants to make a short ride, get rid of the car, and get on a train.
I was just indicating to Charlie that it's my feeling that the team, at least a little bit of this board, shot itself in the foot with regard to that intersection, because that was always presented as the keystone of the whole plan. You'll have a regional stop out there, and everything inbound of that will be local, and everything outbound of that will be local until you get to Worcester. But in any event, we can worry about that one later. What I would like to do now is go around the room question by question, asking each person, if they would, to go to the microphone to ask their question so that the television can pick up the questions. And I cut this lady off here rather rudely earlier on. If you would like to go first, please. And if you would be so kind as to state your name and your address when you ask the question, just so people know who's who. Please. If you don't want to get up, you're the first. I'll let you ask it from the seat.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Merrilees from Framingham. My interest is because of the whole regional aspect. I got interested in it because several years ago we worked on a history of South Middlesex, and the Ashland Historical Society was very busy cooperating with us. My interest is not on either one side or the other, but I'm interested in all the various aspects that have been brought up so far tonight, and I'm still listening.
Okay, thank you. We'll take our first question now, please.
Can we use this microphone?
No, those microphones there for the television, and your name first, your name and address, please.
I'm E.A. Wells at 15 Prospect Heights in Ashland. I'm an environmental scientist and a consultant. So my training and background leads me to environmental type questions and concerns. My concern is environmental trade-offs. I think most of us are aware that there are potential regional benefits for mass transit. The trade-offs of that I'm not concerned with right now. The trade-offs I'm concerned with right now is selecting the proper local sites. When you're looking at different local sites, you need to look at all the various environmental impacts of each local site and compare them. And I'm wondering what the status of that is at this point, whether all the pluses and minuses of each potential local site has been looked at and addressed. We've talked here a lot about traffic, but there are many, many other environmental impacts. I'd be very interested in seeing some as quantitative as possible analysis. In traffic, certainly, I would think you'd want those contours that were referenced, the traffic use contours. With wetlands, I'd be very interested in wetlands assessments, socioeconomics, what's the dollars and cents to Ashland and other towns as to where the site is located. There's a whole host of issues that need to be addressed before a site can be selected. And my impression is very much similar to one expressed earlier, that it seems as though you've got your preferences already made prior to doing the scientific analysis. And I would like to see a clear scientific analysis done comparing the alternatives.
What is the question?
The question is, what is the status of the environmental assessment, and how detailed have the studies been done, and if they haven't been done, when they will be done?
Thank you. Well done.
We have not begun an environmental analysis on any of the station sites. I think to the question that your selectman put, are we putting the cart before the horse? I think the question here before the town should be, do you want any station in town first? And if the answer to that is no, is why should we do an environmental study on any site in town? Now, I think before we get to any analysis, I think the town, through your selectman or through some committee that might be formed, has to answer that question for us. I think, perhaps mistakenly, but it had been forwarded to the T that the town was generally in favor of House Street. If that isn't the case, and we were willing to take it at your word that it was, now that it's clear to us that there wasn't a consensus, or if I'm assuming that it isn't, there isn't a consensus, we're willing to start over on that. But I think the basic question is, do you want any station here? It would be, we'd rather not analyze in depth 3 stations in Ashland if it's essentially going to come out that you don't want any station here. There are some, we need some intermediate stations to build the ridership up to make the line feasible. I don't think it's written anywhere that there has to be a station in Ashland. So essentially, we're looking for the town to help us with the, I don't think you have to do a $200,000 study on each site to pick. I think we ought to be able to get a consensus with the kind of talent that I'm sure is in this town, and you're an example of some of that talent. I think we ought to be able to come up with what we like as a site to study in more detail. I shouldn't think we have to, spend a year agonizing over which of these three sites, if perhaps the answer is going to be none of them. I don't know if that's it. The answer to your question is we haven't done any environmental analysis on any of the sites.
But in any event, it's part of the contract in the initial phase to do complete NEPA review.
Sir.
How you doing? My name's Jack Farrell. I live up on Cross Street, 40 Cross Street. You said that every station would add 2.5 minutes to the trip length. If you made 2 small stations or had 1 large station, I mean, wouldn't it be a quicker stop at a smaller station and have less of an impact on the area? You had 2 small stations, say 1 in Southborough, 1 in downtown, as opposed to 1 on House Street. You've got, that many, twice as many people at 1 station. It seems like it should all add up about the same.
Thank you. No, the thing that usually happens is you've got a large, heavy train and you're slowing down in order to come to a stop, and then you're accelerating slowly to build up speed to go to the next stop, and that's really where you lose the time, because the commuters get on real fast and they get off real fast, and that's not the problem. It's starting and stopping.
Next.
Joe Howard, 38 Valley Road here in Ashland. I'm curious to know why you folks wouldn't be willing to rescope your size goals for the station and make something smaller, something that would fit in the center of town, where I believe you already own property. It presently pays the town of Ashland 26 cents in annual tax. The town will lose that tax base if you develop a station there, and we're not going to gain anything. What we're going to gain will be the heartaches of additional traffic, maintaining those roads, and all the other things that go along with that kind of a monolith.
Rob?
Can I make a statement now, John?
I would prefer questions.
Okay, let me just ask you.
We're going to be here all night long if we have
Let me just,
statements.
I'll make my as brief as possible. I'm a member of the Ashland Rail Committee, and basically I think many of our position has been already enunciated here tonight. We're in favor of a detailed evaluation of before this important decision is made. And I just, going back to the very beginning of this feasibility, when the feasibility study came in, they looked at alternatives to Marlborough and to the south as well. And one of the things they came up with was that a bus transportation from Worcester would be very effective. And they also thought that a Marlborough line would also, rail line would be very effective because you had high population density, and that they didn't have a good road alternative from the Marlborough area. So my first question is that Marlborough alternative now, alternative bus transportation from Worcester been considered, which you avoid all these siting problems, and there's a private company, Peter Pan, doing that right now, who will go out of business if you put this rail line in, according to the feasibility study. So have you looked at the alternative of subsidizing a bus line on the Turnpike and Route 9 and running it that way? And that's
Will include the impacts on the bus and the bus as an alternative.
But I think what we've already established is that you're going to make a siting decision and then do the studies to make sure it's okay. But at that point, it'll be too late.
We need something to study. The siting decision, if you will, is just a decision, an early decision to study something. That decision, again, it has to stand up to a very rigorous and extensive analysis. And that begins a very extensive community participation process where the concerns that I think we've heard and will continue to get
Okay, I guess my point is
come out and get addressed.
I know people in Marlborough seem to really want a train station. They don't have a good alternative. I just wondered what happened to that.
All right. When the feasibility of when this one was studied, Also, extensions to Milford and to Marlboro were evaluated at the same time.
Right.
The Marlboro and the Milford ones were judged to be not feasible, while the one to Worcester was judged to be feasible. And the Worcester one, it was determined, again from this study.
Well, the study, when I read it, it sounded feasible.
Well, the one...
Okay, can I go on to my next point? Sure.
And we need to get other people in here. We're getting into a debate format now. I don't want to do that much.
Okay, let me just...
Joe, no, one at a time. Remember, so we can cycle around a little bit. Thank you, Rob. I'm not trying to shut you down, but I know you got a long list, and there are a lot of other people here.
Good evening. My name's Joe Mignani, 2 Harper Lane in Ashland. After the site becomes on House Street, I'll be your back-door neighbor. A couple of questions. Are there any perks to the town of Ashland? Will there be anything that Ashland gets as a result of this, monetarily? Second of all, you asked the question to the people here tonight, do you want a station in Ashland? Should that be on the ballot? Should we put a question on the ballot? Do we want a train station in Ashland? I mean, I think we're putting the cart before the horse here, and let's find out what all the people want in the town. I mean, you only have, what, maybe 100 people here, maybe? Not even 100. And you're asking these people to make a decision. I don't know if the decision is going to come from the board or from what you're getting from the consensus from the people that live in the town. Is that a viable possibility?
Thanks, Joe. What about Joe's first question?
Which was the question of the referendum.
No, something coming back to the town.
Yeah.
Do we get anything out of this?
Paul, have you called that person to the... I know that question came up a few weeks ago, and we gave Paul the number of the T's expert on financial assessments and whatnot. Did you have a chance?
I think that's still being studied, and the answers are kind of being determined at this point.
Are there any other questions out here in the audience? Vicki?
My name is Vicki Mancini, and I live at 84 Concord Street. And I've heard this question asked 3 times, and I'm going to ask it very simply. Who decides where the station is going to be?
I don't think there's a final arbiter for a decision like that. I think, again, we like a consensus. Within our organization, there's a whole series of decision makers. The MBTA staff, the general manager, the board of directors, the secretary of transportation, construction, state legislatures. It's a large decision-making process. There is no, shall we say, dictator that makes the final decision.
You're not going to get an answer?
I'm not going to get an answer.
I can't give you one, honestly.
So does the town, how much input does the town have to decide where it is going to be if in fact they decide that they want a station?
I would say a lot.
As much as you want. I think it's safe to say that the T is not going to ram this thing down your throat or any town's throat. It may sound self-serving from us, but it's not like we're proposing a incinerator or a hazardous waste landfill or something like that. Or somebody in Westbrook, somebody in Westbrook had the audacity to say, well, that's like a prison. I'd rather have another factory. And they were concerned about cars. And, I mean, if you look at the MBTA map and you see the towns that have commuter rail, it's you have to decide. This town has to decide this for themselves. But most towns feel it's an extremely valuable facet and component of the town that makes the town a much more a valuable community. I know that's the way I live in a town that has commuter rail. I've never taken it, but I'm delighted to have it there because it definitely improves the value of the town and my house. And looking at it just from that point, I mean, we think we're out here talking about a service that most people believe is a good, not only good, to keep cars off the road and good, but it's good for a particular town. We can understand where somebody might not want to live right next to it, but it's generally good for the town. So we don't feel like we're selling a prison or anything like that. And we're certainly not here. I don't think anybody at the T would ever say you have to have this. Everybody else wants it, and you have to have it too. I don't think we're here to say that tonight. We want to know if you want it, and to get your feeling on it. We're here to listen to you.
I want it, and I wouldn't mind having it downtown because my dream is to be able to walk downtown, get the train, and go to Wellesley, where I work.
Garen, you were next. Then Jack, and then these two gentlemen.
Garen Bresnick, 39 Lockridge Lane. You've said that it won't be rammed down our throat, but when faced with a fait accompli of House Street, I think there are some serious problems. In other words, if that is the only feasible site, then I wonder whether the town wants it. And I guess my question is, if we decide, or if you tell us that House Street is the only feasible site from the MBTA standpoint, and we decide we do not want it there, what do we do to make sure that it doesn't go there?
Gentleman sitting right there next to you. But we're a state agency. I mean, we work with Secretary Taylor. There's a process through our board of directors, through the state legislature. It's a decision-making process, and it's a checks and balances. I think that we'd like to avoid all of that. That's why I propose I said before, we could have a task force, some group that we could work with, really explore this in detail with people who know the area better than we do. And I would hope that a consensus would come out of the end of that process, and we'll go on to the next stage.
Ma'am, and then Jack, once you go to the microphone. Please.
I'm Alice Peterson. I live at 90 Howe Street. I bought that place in 1975 because I had my own little private forest. And the only neighbor was my next door with Larry Snow. And I could only see him in the wintertime because the trees blocked our way. Now they've widened Howe Street a bit because there's two side streets above me and two below me. Even though there's a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, I have very seldom seen anybody, except neighbors who have children and understand, doing under 40. What do we have to guarantee that these people who would be, if we do get the Howe Street station, won't be traveling down there 60 miles an hour over that big, wide edifice of a bridge to make their way to the station on time? And I don't think it's going to be safe for an old lady to cross the street to get to my mailbox now. I have had incidents even now with the street the way it is. So I'm concerned about the quality of life in that neighborhood. If you do put the station down there, can we have speed bumps or gates that people have to get out and open? I don't like the idea.
The town has to answer that one. It's our police force. The police force will have to be out there with radar coverage. Jack.
I'd like to waive my first round question and offer an alternative to a question, and that is, could we send you home tonight with a first night, if you will, consensus by a simple show of hands as to how many people favor a downtown 250 or 200 car station, how many people favor the mega station at Howe Street, and something in between on Pleasant Street, just a simple, tally of three shows of hands.
Jack, it's an interesting idea, but I would like to get some people to have a chance to ask the question. This gentleman here and then you. You had your hand up. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Scoots Chajari, 198 Carterville Road. I've been a resident for 56 years, and I've lived on Carterville Road for 28, which is just about 50%. And I know a little bit about the town because I've been here so long. Downtown has always been zoned industrial, and the whole southern side of Pleasant Street has always been zoned industrial. And it mystifies me how anybody can think of passing up two industrial zones and putting 600 cars in a residential area. And I agree, it was spot zoned a long time ago so we could help the kids in the town with hockey. We put an arena in there. Then it turned into Olson Medical. But now, essentially, what you're going to be doing is passing up 2 industrial areas to throw 600 cars into a residential A, and it just mystifies me, and I'd like to know how anybody gets to that kind of an idea in their mind.
John Friedlich from 21 Voyagers Lane. I moved here hearing a rumor there was going to be a station downtown. That was premature, I guess. I personally would like to see a centralized station that my daughter could someday walk to easily, one that would service the town and maybe help the businesses in the town. If there is not enough room for however many cars you want along those tracks, why can't you put an off-site parking area, for instance, across 135 in the parking lot by Dairy Queen, which is only a short 1 block away, and people could walk in. They're doing that from the garage in Framingham already. So I don't see why that is not an alternative, and it would also take some of the traffic from Holliston and keep it on that side of 135 rather than having to cross over to get to the station.
Was that investigated?
No, but not that we'll look at.
Charlie.
My name is Charlie Maloney. I live on the corner of Howe Street, and if you don't recognize me, it's because I've been trampled over for the last 2 years while I've been building the airport.
Yeah.
I really came here tonight to make statements, but if it's a type of hearing that I can only ask questions, I'll put it in the form of questions. Number one is Ashland historically has been intertwined with the railroad. I feel that we were disenfranchised by a line that didn't want to carry passengers. Why can't we have a station in Ashland like Framingham with 200 or 300 cars, like Natick with 200 or 300 cars, like Wellesley with 200 or 300 cars? We're the same type town. We were on the line when they were there. Why can't we have back what we were disenfranchised? Why must we be subjected to a major station? I think we have that right as a town that helped build that railroad.
Thank you, Charlie.
My name is Dave Tully from Fox Hill Road. I have one question for you. You two gentlemen showed us in all the other areas where you preferred one site over another. And you showed us 3 sites in Ashland, but you haven't told us which site you preferred over the others. Could you answer that question?
We're here to find out what you feel about it.
Well, I was asking because in Westboro and those areas, you showed us which site you preferred. So I'm trying to see which site you might prefer in Ashland over another. You must have you had some reason and some concerns in the other towns. But when you came to Ashland, you only showed us 3 sites, but you didn't tell us which site you were preferring over another. Are you preferring the smaller or the larger or the guy in between?
The whole line, it would help the whole line if we had a larger station. But I must say, again, I don't want to blame anybody, but it's on the record that townspeople, or not the townspeople, but at least one selectman and the DPW director or somebody else who visited these sites with the T favored Howe Street. Now that's what we were given when we started our job.
That's because we had 405.
That's 2 people on 10,000.
We're here tonight to hear what everybody thinks, and essentially we're discarding that. But if you want to know how we got there, I'm telling you that's the answer.
But for you to come into this room, this meeting, and tell us that you don't have one site over another, is hard to believe. It's hard to believe you could come in here tonight and show us. Why I say that is because you gave, and the only reason I say that is you gave good descriptions of the other towns. And you told us why, wetlands and this land and that land. But in Ashland, you've come to us with 3 sites, and you're not telling us. All you said is that downtown can house 250. Howe Street can hold 600, and probably in the middle we're talking 400. So we've got 3 levels. And you're not saying which level you're looking for in the town of Ashland. There's got to be one that you're really looking for.
Well, no.
I think that would help the people in town
if you're
make that choice.
Hung up on it, let me answer that, because there is a written record of at least one of your selectmen favoring the House Street site. And that was as a result of a field trip with some MBTA staff about 4 years ago, and some other town officials, I don't remember their name, but I think the DPW director was one of them. Now, in other towns, in Westboro, for instance, they said, we don't know, we have at least 6 sites we want you to look at. So, and we listened to them and said, okay, we'll listen, we'll look at the 6 or 7 sites you looked at. Of course, we looked at others as well. And we essentially did a parallel process with a committee that they formed in Westboro, and I think it worked very well as a member of the committee from Westboro here tonight. If you want to hear how it worked there, he can tell you about it. But in this town, it was a little bit different because we were given at the outset some documentation that said that at least some folks, and some folks that presented themselves essentially as representing consensus, that the downtown site was too small. McGunko Road, Street, or whatever it is, had some other problems of access and whatnot, and House Street was the best. And we essentially, we took the town at that word. But we're ready to wipe the slate clean.
So what I'm saying is, you're saying to us, the townspeople, you know, get together and make a decision and put it to us?
Well, we're here tonight to listen, and we're taking notes on all these issues. Obviously, as I said to somebody else, we're not going to ram anything. If I hear 100 people say they don't want House Street, we're going to confer with the selectmen, and I assume we'd be able to decide, hey, let's forget House Street or any other site that we have a meeting on. Now, but I mean, obviously, no matter what we pick, we went to Grafton and we had all the selectmen stand up and give us a speech of how they wanted that T stop. And they said they had the land for us. They would give us the zoning, give us the land for free. It was just unbelievable. But I'm not told, I know as we go down, we're going to have opposition, even from a town that presented, and there was about maybe 20 or 30 people there. Nobody said a word against it. Everybody said, please give us that station. We need it, we want it, we're supportive. We're still going to get opposition. Obviously, you don't build anything today without somebody feeling like they don't want it there. So obviously, we're going to expect some opposition along the line. Well, our job is to figure out, you know, how to do this as best as possible. This gentleman sort of outlined the thing. We're going to have to look at this thing from all kinds of criteria, from traffic, from air pollution, from noise, historic and archaeological, wetlands, all kinds of criteria. But we want to sort of get a sense of if we're heading in the right direction. And we're hoping we can do it tonight. It might take more meetings. We'll take as long as it takes to make sure we're going in the right direction on this.
John.
Thank you. John Renane from 267 Corville Road. I met earlier with you, so I want to keep it very brief. I'm going to offer you the deal of a century. As part of the Rail Committee study group, we've identified 5 specific reasons why the House Street site would eventually end up becoming an exorbitant cost factor for the T and for the town and possibly the state. I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm going to make this available to you when I finish. That will save you a $200,000 environmental study. But I do want to get a couple of things on the record so that there can be no mistaking about it.
John, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Is this a question or a statement?
I have a question. It is a statement with a question. House Street is going to be a problem for Ashland whether a T-stop is there or not, because of the House Street Bridge and infrastructure of usage of roads going out to 135, which the original study proposed. Now, I have problems trying to define what you're advocating tonight. My understanding is that you were there to go in and reaffirm the original study that came out 3 years ago, wherein you said House Street was the better site. Are you saying that that has gone by the boards and that you now see the whole thing going into the hopper again to choose? If that is so, then I think you have to give very strong consideration to a lot of the comments that have been made tonight about the historical railroad background, as we've talked about. And I hope that you will take this into strong consideration. Ashland, I don't think, is against a T-stop. It can benefit the town, it can benefit the residents, both going into Boston and coming back. But we do ask for a much better detailed study than what passed in that first one. I'll give you this at the end.
There was a question from this gentleman in the green jacket. Oh, excuse me, gentleman behind it.
My name is Joe Murphy. I live at 220 Carterville Road. Now, it's obvious to me, if it isn't to a lot of other people, that the state has decided to do something special for House Street, which is right in back of my house. They wouldn't build part of a superhighway with no start or no finish. They've got big plans for House Street. So all this is a waste of time. You'll find out sooner or later. Don't you think so?
Certainly isn't what I expected.
I'm Frank Golke, 65 Cross Street. Ashland has another resource which hasn't been mentioned here tonight, and that's the Sudbury River. It's been much abused and much neglected, but if you were looking for a site that created maximum impact on the Sudbury River, the House Street site would certainly be it. My question to you is just how central in the T's deliberations are the protection of a resource that is of great benefit to the town and could be of even greater benefit to the town if it's protected.
Any project today has to have great respect for natural resources such as the Sudbury River. This job, because it's state funded, is in no way exempt from any of the myriad laws that relate to wetland resources. This would come under the Local Wetlands Protection Act. It would come under EPA 404, the Corps of Engineers 404, EPA National Pollution Discharge Elimination Permit, Water Quality Certificate, and probably 8 or 10 other state and federal permits. So we would have to document very, very clearly and secure all the permits that anybody today would with no special benefits attached. We would have to show that we in no way would hurt resources at this site or any site. And of course, the absence of potential resources that might be impacted is a major factor that goes into selecting the candidate sites.
Ernest Rozier, Ramblewood Drive. A question was asked earlier, and the answer, I guess, was very vague. And I will ask the question again. As you put in a very large site, the 600 or so parking site in Ashland, all I see are negatives financially to the town. I can see at the next town meeting, once the site is in, the fire department and the police department looking for additional personnel. We already talked about the traffic. The lady down there was concerned about traffic, so I can see more policemen being needed. Up goes the number of police personnel that the chief will be looking for. Up goes our taxes. I wouldn't be surprised the fire department might be able to make a case for needed fire protection. So I don't see too many positives so far for the town. I would also imagine out of the 600, 500 parking spaces that 90% of those would probably be out of towners and not people within the town. So once again, I see the town of Ashland supporting other towns and us paying for that on our tax rate. The question that was asked was what financial benefit or concessions the town might get from the MBTA, and I believe it was referred back to the selectman's town manager that he was going to talk to somebody, which is a very cute way to avoid, I think, an answer. So I'll put the question to you differently. You have a station in Needham, station in Wellesley, station in Framingham, station in Natick. Those towns, what financial support directly are they receiving now from the MBTA for having the stations in their town? Or are they, in essence, supporting the MBTA on the townspeople taxes for the penalty of having the station in their town? Where are our benefits?
To the best of my knowledge, there's no funding from the MBTA to any city or town in the MBTA district or any town that's served by the MBTA.
It actually is a little worse than that.
We're going to lose the...
We are a fringe community, and as such, we are assessed for monies, and then because we don't have direct service, we get those monies back. Or have been in reasonably decent. The expectation is that the unreasonably decent measure will diminish to zero.
So it's costing us even
more? It will be on the order of $250,000 to $300,000. Yes, and David's working to do something about that, but I don't expect anything to happen. David, Al, you have a message. Please come to the mic, Al.
Al Porter, Indian Spring Road. Going along on that same discussion, what happens if the T does not have a stop here? Do we get charged? And not directing it at MBTA, but more towards David. Does he know the answer to that?
Currently, because Ashland is considered a fringe community, as John said, fringe community by definition of the T suggests that we have access to the use of the commuter rail, but we don't have a stop. Therefore, we have an assessment on our cherry sheet of approximately $250,000 that we're supposed to pay back to the T for the privilege of having our people use the T. People in Goshen can't use the T, Cummington and Western Mass can't use it, therefore they don't pay an assessment. The fact that we don't have a stop means that we get reimbursed on our cherry sheet for the bulk of that money. Now, I've tried to find out from the Ways and Means Committee exactly what that reimbursement has been, and tried to find out from the T exactly what that reimbursement has been. The last 4 years, it's been folded in to the larger number of local aid, but it was $160,000 the year that it got folded in, and that amount hasn't been reduced as far as I know. So we're approximately receiving, although it can't be identified as such, $160,000 a year in reimbursements for not having a stop right now. My sense is that, and what I want to know from the T is whether or not they're prepared to treat these other communities, not just Ashland, but all the other communities, in the same way by allowing them to retain that $160,000 reimbursement. That isn't a question. If you want to ask me my question, my answer to that question, clearly the answer ought to be no. I want to know what the T's answer is. Are you suggesting that all of those towns are going to lose, all those fringe communities, in particular Ashland, is going to lose that $160,000 reimbursement? I would like a direct answer to that question. The second point I wanted to raise was the question you raised earlier. Someone asked you a very specific question. Who decides whether or not we have a stop and where it goes? Who's the ultimate decision maker? And you answered, a lot of people. That's not an answer. Somebody ultimately has to make a final decision as to whether or not this site is going to be approved. If what you're saying is ultimately the MBTA makes a final decision, then let's find that out. If what you're saying is that the legislature makes a decision, then let me know, because it's the first decision I've ever been consulted about. The fact of the matter is, you don't need any legislative approval to use the downtown site because you already own the property. So you need no legislative approval. With regard to the House Street site, if there's a land transfer, under Chapter 579, you need a vote of the legislature. to transfer property, if I understand it correct. Am I right about that?
Only if it's publicly owned, but it's privately owned, so we already have the power.
It's privately owned, so you don't need any legislative approval for privately owned property. So when you said to this gentleman that somehow it's up to the legislature, maybe you could explain how you could decide.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you in an uncomfortable.
It's not uncomfortable. I'm very comfortable having the power to make it. Just don't tell me I have that power when I don't. I don't think the legislature makes this decision.
No, they don't.
And so don't give the impression to people that we do. In fact, this is a T decision. What we want to know is who makes the decision within the T and how is it made. Secondly, I would like a public participation plan submitted to us, not simply, well, we'll be back and check it out, or if there's 100 people who are going to raise their hand and you don't like one site, yeah, well, maybe we'll throw that site out and look at another one. I think there's got to be a more organized process for determining what the public sentiment is here.
Yeah, well, you yourself, you asked what the community participation process is.
Right.
So obviously you must believe that there is a process that would help us make a decision together. And
you don't?
No, well, you do.
Of course I do.
Well, then believe in it. We're committed to a community participation process.
And what is the process that you're planning?
The process is to listen to concerns of people and to try to get a consensus of I mean, if
let me ask you a different question. If you said, well, if the town doesn't want a site, we won't cite it. I haven't heard that from you tonight.
Oh, okay.
But let me ask it a different way. When you ask the question, does the town want the site, or where would the town prefer to have the site? Who in that sentence, in your mind, constitutes the word the town? Who to you is the town? Who is it in the town that will give you the answer that you're looking for? And how do you intend to get it?
David, you want to answer that?
I think that depends on the community. You have selectmen that are elected. If they choose to make that statement to us, then we would accept it on behalf of the town. If they want a town meeting vote, that's another vehicle.
So what's you're saying you will go to the selectmen to determine.
I would think they could speak for the town.
All right, that's important for me to understand, that you're going to be looking to the selectmen for making ultimately, so the selectmen are holding this public hearing to get public sentiment. Is that correct?
I assume.
Is that?
I assume so.
Okay.
We were invited.
That's precisely, by the way, how the decision was made about the House Street Bridge. As a matter of fact, no, let's be clear here. Let's be clear here. The decision was made specifically because there were certain options we had. We couldn't choose to have exactly the bridge we wanted, but we could have chosen to have a bridge or no bridge, or we could have had the town pay for their own bridge. But we weren't free under federal guidelines, not state guidelines, but under federal guidelines, to put a bridge in that the town wanted the way the town wanted it. But the final decision was always a decision that remained with the community. And I think people have forgotten that. And I don't want us to go through this again the second time, where we make a decision and someone says, the state, or the other T or someone else told us we had to have this, without having a clear sense that the town as a whole has somehow made this decision. And I would ask you to pursue that as vigorously as you can, to have a clear idea of what you mean when you say the town. I have some faith that the selectmen will, in fact, they're the ones that called this meeting tonight. We'll get a consensus, but I need to know that it's the selectmen that we can go to with our concerns, and that you will, in fact, respond to what the selectmen are going to recommend.
Are there any outstanding questions that David asked? I think in the interchange, you've got all the answers. Okay, in the back, sir.
Good evening. My name is Ben Churko. I work in the town of Ashland and I'm considering buying a home in town, so I have a couple questions. Generally, traffic. I've driven through Framingham and I've been stuck behind the light as a train comes through. What kind of numbers do you project, or how often? What will the queues be, first of all? And the second question is, how often, how many trips per day is the train going to be taking through the town of Ashland in the AM and in the PM peak hours, and on and off during the day and on the weekends? And I guess thirdly, my other question is, what kind of impacts do you have as far as noise? Does the train going to be blowing its horn every time it stops? Those kind of impacts, please.
Well, in the rush hour, you're talking perhaps 4 trains, maybe 5 trains, one way going in, same thing coming back at night.
To the AM and PM peak hours?
Right. Some service in the middle of the day. I doubt there'd be service on the weekends at this point.
What about traffic backups?
Traffic patterns?
Traffic backups. When the train stopped, how often the train stopped?
Framingham's a tough situation because you have Conrail, and it's a major area for Conrail, and their freight trains sometimes will sit there and block the signal, and the gates go down, and that backs up the traffic. We, with our trains, have tried to make a point of making sure the train moves far enough away from the intersection so it doesn't affect the gates. And our trains are much shorter than Conrail. And that's part of the decision in where you put a station and how you design a signal system so that it doesn't happen.
And as far as noise, horns,
Oh, there shouldn't be any train whistles out here. You got orders to...
Don't say that so quick.
You got orders to...
There's a Conrail requirement.
Which crossings?
All inverted crossings.
Then these are rules over which we have no control. They're mandated on us by the Federal Railroad Administration.
I believe the selectmen have the right, if they want to stop the whistling, they petition the state DPW.
No, we cannot. It's federal law. We've tried. Is there anyone here who's not had a chance to ask a question first? These 2 folks here, and then back in the corner. Bill, you after that. You spoke, didn't you? Incredible. Please. Who did I go ask? Over you first, please, sir.
Bob Daly, and I live up at Oak Street. And I'm looking at the 3 sites. We're talking about Southborough, we're talking about Howe Street, we're talking about Pleasant Street, right? I mean, by Corderville there, by the market, right? Is that the other side? So I see all 3 of those sites impacting Oak Street and Corderville Road and Pleasant Street. I mean, we have to do something about the traffic. We have terrible traffic conditions now on Oak Street. What the heck are we going to do with 600 more cars coming through?
You have a question?
My name is Marie Gain. I live at 58 Kings Row, and I would like to thank Representative Magnani for trying to clarify and sort out the issues and the process as to who we have to go and talk to. I would like to encourage the selectmen to look at a location somewhere in Ashland on a positive tone. I think that a station in Ashland would be an asset to the town. I'm also a firm believer that, and this is a question directed to the T, if there's money available, you can do miracles, and you can solve a lot of problems. What is the budget right now for the station in Ashland? So that's my question, part of my question. The second is the timetable. That question was asked before, and I don't believe it has been answered yet. By which time does the MBTA needs to know if the town of Ashland is in favor of a station in Ashland, in terms of the decision-making process as to where the other stations have to go, and what overall timetable does the MBTA has in terms of what are your limits?
You asked about a budget. The total project is expected to be in the $80 million range to go the 23 miles to Worcester. And a good portion of that is, of course, for track and rail bed, but other substantial portions are for the platform at each of the station sites.
Could you speak up a little?
Oh, I'm sorry. The whole project will be about $80 million. And the major costs are for the track and the ballast, improvements on the rail, as well as the station sites and parking lots. The downtown Worcester area will be an expensive one, perhaps in the $4 million range. I think the Howe Street site was programmed for about $2 million, but I don't recall the exact number. But there are numbers in that range. Just today, the type of raised platform that we're looking at, and these will be raised platforms so you can walk directly right from the platform into the train. Just for the station platform and canopy, we're talking in the range of $1 million. And
how about that improvements around, landscaping, buffers?
well, any improvements that we have to do to local roads and the amenities of the station would be put before the facility is open.
Timetable, can you answer that?
Timetable.
When the decision on siting.
The administration has come up with a timetable that they're talking about for 1996 to see the station operable, the line running. But on any project, any major new capital project like this, you have to go through a very, very rigorous process. And that's an ambitious schedule. I'll just leave it at that.
Robert Thorne, resident. I'd ask if any serious consideration or study has been given by the MBTA to multiple stops along the line in this area, in this location. It's been alluded to by several people, but I wonder if it's really been studied by the planners. I'm thinking of Southville, House Street, Pleasant Street, and downtown. In countries where they are successful at doing this, they have small stops, unobtrusive, very efficient and effective. You don't have to have a mammoth mall with 600 cars. People, just a few cars here and there. And you hardly notice that it's there. Sorry for the comment of my question, John.
I mentioned at the outset that initially the idea was given to just 3 intermediate stations. And right now we're looking at 3 or 4. And the trade-off is you add the 2.5 minutes of running time when you add a station. Now, the idea of that is 3 stations. I think we could easily say that would be out of the question because we still have a good distance. We have 10 more stations downstream that we have to stop at. And, we want to have a service that's not going to take 2 hours. We want to develop a competitive service. So that's what's against us. I mean, we are, quite a distance from Boston, and that's a destination. So even though some of the closer-in stations, the stations are short distances apart, the running time to Boston isn't that much. So here, we couldn't think about having 2 or 3 stations in this area without seriously hurting the total running time.
That's the point. The thing is made to accommodate everybody but people. But people, it's in a little neighborhood where you want to get in, your wife drives you to the station and goes home while you walk there. There's only a few cars. There's not a total overall benefit to having 600 cars drive through House Street. That's just a transference of a problem.
Sir.
You told us earlier this evening that how Grafton was very enthusiastic about receiving the station. And what my question is concerns Southborough. You mentioned the possibility of a station in Southborough. Can you give us any idea of how enthusiastic Southborough is about siting a station at Route 85? My name is John Deneen, 275 Corderville Road.
We have a meeting planned in Southborough on March 31st, so we'll know then what they think about it.
Is there any, there's some people who haven't had a chance. The person in the green sweater and then the gentleman in the blue sweater, whichever order.
Okay. A couple questions. First of all, would you have double track in Ashland? Would you need a double track to pass in Ashland?
There's double track there now.
Double track.
Yeah, but don't you go one direction one way and use the other track in the other direction? Would you have to add more track there?
No, we would not be adding track.
Okay. The MBTA, how much of that tract do you own right now?
We own up to Framingham.
Up to Framingham, so you would be
From
purchasing?
128 basically to Framingham is ours.
So you would be purchasing from Conrail the rest?
No,
Or leasing?
Basically leasing.
Gentlemen in the green sweater.
Hello, Mountain Ridge, 3 Dale Road. My question was, when you first spoke of these 3 stations, that was with consideration of a station being at 495. And that, I think, is what is impacting most of us, is the disappearance of that station. And I, myself, was very in favor of a station in Ashland until I heard that news. The specific question is, now that there's no longer a station at 495, is it feasible that there could be 2 stations inside 495 and outside the Framingham station? That's a specific question. 2 stations. Thanks.
Between I assume you say perhaps one in Southborough and one in the center.
Exactly.
Ashland.
As opposed to a 600 station, 250.
Yeah.
Because you keep saying we had 3 stations, but that was with the 495 station. Now that's gone. So whatever that was based on is no longer the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and that's a tough question, because what we're trading off here is a turn time versus the smaller stations. Obviously, a large station makes sense when you can easily get to it by major roads, and I don't have to tell any of you here that's not the situation we're dealing with in Ashland. But that's a tough issue that I can't give you a yes or no answer on that. Can the whole system, essentially you're saying, if we assume we have 3 other stations and we end up with 5 intermediate stations, I don't know. I really don't have the answer to that.
I thought that would push it from 3 to 4.
Well, we may go to one at Millbury, near the turnpike.
I think that's what has people scared.
We're going to have to look at.
I think that's what has people scared, where most of the questions are coming from, the disappearance of that 495 station.
Bob Dankner, House Street. I've got 2 questions, one for the MBTA, I guess one for the selectmen. Previously, we talked about that in study of the roads, you didn't expect an impact on the traffic on House Street. What would happen, and then who would be responsible if after the station was there, it was discovered 6 months later that the traffic had upgraded it from one level to the next level? Who then would be responsible for that, taking care of the road so that it would be able to handle that? Secondly, I guess this is more to the selectmen, is what vehicle will you now set up to increase the communication for the town to the MBTA, so that we've got a clear communications, which it seems to have previously broken down from 3-4 years ago?
Okay, the second question first. I think, as Charlie said, that it would make sense if the selectmen presumably appointed a committee that we could work with, and presumably that committee would be, it wouldn't include the 8 people or 15 who come in and that have spoken against House, but it would include representative folks from throughout the town. And they could be the ones that we could interface with. We don't have to do that. We can come to meetings like this. I think we're going to leave that to all of you.
What about the question about upgrading the road? Let's assume that the study's incorrect. If there's a problem with the road, where is that?
Well, the town would basically be left with a problem.
No, it's not that. We hope our study in the first place would identify the problems, and if there's still problems, we'd have to work to cover the town.
Oh, for a perfect word.
In response to the question, what has been going on, basically the selectmen have polled that we're going to debate a committee at the next meeting and get some cross spectrum appointees and get something going on. we basically, and at least I'll speak for myself and no one else on the board, but I think a little bit blindsided by the speed with which all of a sudden this came. We've been assured that nothing was going to happen until late this year, and construction was going to happen for another 2 years. And that whole set of parameters changed. And you add that in with, as the gentleman said in the green sweater, the disappearance of what we thought was a major magnet on 495. The whole thing is different now. And so we're going to have to do something. So we will come up with some kind of a committee. It's going to have to be representative. I think in this room is a pretty hefty predominance of folks from the affected neighborhood. We'll have to take that into account on the committee, obviously, but we need to get some other folks from town as well on that committee. I want to make the round robin. I want to make sure people who haven't spoken get a chance to speak. Yes, you and then Bill Engstrom.
You'll have to excuse me if I stutter. I'm a little nervous. I've never done this before. But my name is Gail Benedict, and I live on Corderville Road. Right now, the traffic going by my house is tremendous in the morning and at night. I can't cross my street to get my mail. As far as the traffic and the speed goes, the police department does have to control it. They would have to hire 2 more policemen to do it. They can't do it. They would have to sit there all the time. The speed limit is never observed. 700 more cars, and they have to come Corderville Road and Oak Street. I don't see how it can possibly work. But my question to you along with that is, if this station is built, what's down the line? Do we have a strip mall? Do we have a donut store like the lady said in front of me? Do we ruin another neighborhood?
It's a zoning question for the town in that case. We've got spot zoning over there right now. I'm not going to presume to speak for what town meeting will vote, but my guesses are that it would be unlikely. Bill, you wanted to speak? No, it would be unlikely that there would be any further commercial development out in that area. But that's one person's opinion, mine.
As one of the world's great experts on this problem, I've put almost 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars into trying to fight the Howe Street Bridges project.
Bill, could you identify yourself?
Yes, Bill Engstrom. I am co-owner of the property at 28 Howe Street with my wife, and in that property, my wife has a company making custom products for heart surgery.
Called Olson Medical.
Yes. Called Olson Medical Sales, Inc., although it does assemble custom kits for heart surgery. I don't know how to put this into a question, but I do think that the assembled people here should be interested in a few facts which have not been brought up. And one of them is that this particular project comes as the result of, not of the Board of Selectmen, but as the result of former highway supervisor and now under some other title, Benjamin Montenegro, Mr. Polychronis, who was the previous project manager of this project under the Dukakis administration, working for and at the direction, I believe, of Secretary Salvucci, took Mr. Polychronis around the town to our place and described it as, not as Olson Medical Sales, where we had been for 10 years, but as the abandoned hockey rink. And he persuaded Mr. Polychronis to select this property. It was not until about a year later that Mr. Montenegro tried to buy our property from us. And when I said no, a year later, this particular selection of our site came out in the newspapers, and for the next year and a half appeared in the newspapers as the abandoned hockey rink. So I think you should all be interested in that. Secondly, my heart goes out to you living on Howe Street with the new bridge, because that is exactly what I have been saying for 4 years, as the members of the Board of Selectmen will agree. I argued that, and not one resident of Howe Street except Charlie Maloney, except Charlie, would support me. And well, yes, but we never really got people calling the selectmen and so on and so forth. And you know my heart was in the right place. Yeah. Secondly, Mr. Magnani has selected this opportunity to spread a story which is not true. It is not true that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had to accept the federal guidelines. If you read in the Federal Code of Regulations on bridges and highways, there is a provision in there which provides for projects to consider the ecology. Yes. Okay, but I understand, but I want people to know that this is not true, that he's been spreading a story which is designed to attack us, which he has done in the newspaper, and frankly, David, you should be ashamed of yourself for lying in public, in my opinion.
Bill, please.
And that's the truth. Okay.
You have a comment on the MBTA?